Today, the day I'm sitting down to begin writing this script is November 8th. Metroid Dread has been out for 1 month now, and I've played it from start to finish 5 times. It'll be 6 after I've finished recording footage for this video. In anticipation of this game, I also, like many others, went back and replayed the mainline Metroid series, and also Prime 1 because I love it. I actually streamed all of these games, including Dread, but I also played them each on my own, including beating Super Metroid and Prime twice over each. Needless to say, I love the Metroid series a lot, and I'd probably place it as my second favorite game franchise, being beat out only by Zelda. Yet, despite Zelda being my favorite, most games in that series I play through only a single time every couple of years, whereas the Metroid series seems to have this incredibly alluring sense of replayability, meaning that for my favorite games in the series, I can play them several times a year, or even several times through a month, and I never seem to get bored of them. With that in mind, what is it about the series that keeps me always coming back for more? And what is it about Dread in particular? I think I've narrowed it down to a handful of ideas. Its level design and progression structure, its isolating atmosphere, and its well-tuned sense of satisfaction in its gameplay. It can be a fairly challenging game at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding to get through. This is probably the same reason I sank well more than 100 hours into Hollow Knight and more than 1,000 into Breath of the Wild. I just love getting lost in a game, both in the sense of immersion, but also in the navigational sense. If you've kept up with my dungeon design series, this probably won't surprise you. I've been very open about my love for dungeons like the Forest and Water Temple, which are somewhat notorious for their navigational challenges, and I think this principle shines through clearly with my Metroid games of choice. My favorite games in this series right now are Super Metroid and now Metroid Dread, which are the 2 games in the series that basically have no hand-holding. Samus Returns basically follows a very linear path through its zones, with very little backtracking to previous zones. Zero Mission gives you map markers. Fusion has Adam, giving you fairly specific objectives, and Prime has its scan feature, which, in addition to giving us the awesome scan visor, also causes hint markers to pop up now and then and direct you to certain points on the map. Now, this isn't a bad thing, by the way, and in my mind presents an interesting clash in ideas. Fusion and Zero Mission give you these map markers and a clear sense of where to go, but never do they tell you how to get there. The path is almost always not straightforward and is consistently littered with secrets and collectibles. Because of this, I often find myself struggling more with navigation in these games than I do in Super Metroid or Dread, because that critical path is often hidden, winding, and almost a puzzle in itself. And I'm so excited to find these collectibles that I often think I'm uncovering something secret, but end up stumbling into the critical path while thinking that I'm going up against it. Again, not a bad thing. There's a great sense of discovery to be had here, and these games are brilliant in their own right. With Super Metroid and Dread, however, there are no map markers or anybody telling you where to go. Well, that's not entirely true, I suppose. Dread gives you precisely 1 map marker near the beginning of the game, and a rather obtuse objective of returning to your ship, which is the end game. But that's about it. Even though Adam returns from Fusion, his information is more often related to the path behind you or things you've already uncovered, rather than an indication of where to go next. The only exceptions are when he tells you to go fight the final boss, but still doesn't tell you how to get there, or one instance when a path is opened for you in another zone due to a story event, and he suggests heading there next. But otherwise, he's almost always speculating or giving you information on things you've already encountered, so the agency is always in the player's hands on where to move forward. And because of this, the designers have to craft the environments themselves to funnel you in the right direction and silently push you forward. Basically, the game design itself tricks you into following its critical path. It gives you the illusion of huge open branching paths, but places obstacles and barriers in the way to keep you moving in the right direction by process of elimination. Dread is not an open world game, despite that it often feels that way. That openness is a well-crafted illusion. This design choice may sound like a bad thing when I spell it out for you like this, being tricked into a linear progression, but it's not. Besides, Dread does a rather creative job of allowing sequence breaks and experimentation. I've tried some myself and got bombs and the grapple beam early, and was pleasantly surprised at how many small shortcuts the game opened up to me as a reward for this. However, that isn't going to be the focus of this video, because in order to sequence break, you have to consciously battle against the flow of the game's design. You have to be cognitive of these design choices and try to work around them, which is a ton of fun to do, but not what I want to examine in this video. So all I'll say on that subject is that it is extremely refreshing to see a game not only allow sequence breaks, but encourage them by offering unique scenarios and rewards for doing so. Other games would block you with invisible walls or patch those sequence breaks out, but not Dread, and I appreciate that. Metroid and Zelda alike actually tickle a pretty particular itch for me. I've examined a great deal of Zelda dungeons on this channel, in fact, so between that and me binging the Metroid series, I can say with confidence that they do some pretty similar things, though also some things pretty differently. The Zelda series breaks its worlds into separate categories: the Overworld, which acts like something of a hub area, and the dungeons, which for many Zelda titles are the real meat of the game. Metroid doesn't distinguish between these, so all areas are both overworld and dungeon, and they often interconnect, and just as often need to be backtracked through and crisscrossed several times. So in a way, playing through a 2D Metroid title is a lot like playing through a Zelda dungeon, but on a larger scale. The whole game is a dungeon in that sense, so you're very often navigating cramped dark spaces, finding new items and upgrades, and sleuthing for collectible secrets. Now, I know, Zelda dungeons do this too. You find new abilities and items to help with overcoming obstacles, and have to navigate through spaces that present branching paths, locked doors, and tough baddies. So the two series have a lot in common in this way, though in Metroid's case, often those keys we need to open those locked doors or overcome obstacles aren't literal keys like in Zelda, but are Samus's own abilities themselves. Don't get me wrong, Zelda does this too sometimes. For example, you may find the bow in a dungeon, which you need to use to activate an eye switch to open certain doors, which leads you down new paths, and etc. And there are certainly cases where Metroid goes a little more into the literal key territory. For example, in Dread, you need to activate this terminal to open these thermal doors, and the Prime games have, well, literal keys. But more often, Metroid keeps to the former idea and blocks our paths with doors that need certain weapons to open, or with physical barriers that we need abilities to overcome. And unlike Zelda, where a key found in one dungeon is really used only in that one dungeon, Metroid spreads its locks and keys out all over the map. But because these keys are an extension of Samus's abilities, it doesn't feel unnatural. So how does Dread funnel you in the right direction? A good example to get an understanding of this at work is to examine the game's opening section. So we're just going to talk about the first hour of the game to start with for this section of the video, where the game trails you all around Artaria, leading you up to the first boss battle, which is against Corpius, where at the end of the fight we are rewarded with the Phantom Cloak ability. If you were to look at the map of Artaria, it would certainly seem pretty large and open. In fact, it's almost comparable in scope to the entire map of Zero Mission, which is pretty impressive to think about. The game starts you right here at the very bottom of the map in this room with a locked door behind you, meaning there's only one path to take. We'll travel through some caves, and as we explore, we'll essentially run into a series of dead ends. We're intentionally made to walk past doors that we can't open and hallways that shut us out, so that we know there's things to come back to here. And by barring access to these paths, we are led down the intended path by process of elimination. We'll find our way to the first Emmy, who is damaged and serves as a tutorial for countering and evading these guys, as well as blowing them up. And then we're strung along back through caves and into the second Emmy zone. Even in this enormous section of the map, we are led in the right direction pretty subtly. The Emmy, who you can't kill yet, will pursue, chasing you to where you need to go. It may feel like blindly running from an impending threat, but where the path branches are once again a locked door and an out-of-reach ledge, and even in this hallway here, where there are two doors you could go through, they lead to the same room. Meaning, in order to evade the Emmy, the only place to escape to is to slide through this narrow gap and down into the water. Now, examining this with a critical eye, it's pretty obvious that they've done this, but in the heat of the moment, you probably won't notice that you've been funneled in a very specific direction because you're simply trying to escape the Emmy. This moment also presents us with another crutch in Dread's design: the point of no return. In addition to blocking branching paths with locked doors and obstacles, the game also continually locks doors and blocks paths behind us, temporarily preventing us from backtracking. So here, when we land in the water to escape the Emmy, we can't go back the way we came, because we slid through this gap. With the floor submerged in the water, lower than the gap, and without the morph ball, which we don't have yet, we can't fit back through here. The game does this to us again only a short while later, after we climb through the next hallway and are teased by other hallways we can't yet enter. We'll end up in this network station where we'll talk to Adam. There's 4 doors in this room. The one we just came from, a locked thermal door on the bottom left, and a locked charge beam door on the top right. So again, the illusion of open branching paths is here, but there's actually just one way to go, which is through the top left door here. This brings us into a room which at first seems like a dead end, since the next door is through a gap we can't go through, but then after blowing up these destructible walls, some debris will collapse, allowing us to pass through the room, but also having the side effect of blocking the path behind us again. So we can now slide through here to progress, but we can't fit through this gap to backtrack. This brings us back into an Emmy zone, where there is the illusion of openness, but most of the paths simply loop back in on themselves, or are locked shut, forcing us into this exit where the game does it again, dropping us into this pool of water with the door we just came through on a ledge out of reach. Then it does it again here in this room with another pool of water and a high ledge out of reach, and even though this room has branching paths, this door leads to a dead end since we're still lacking the morph ball, and this door leads to a room so cold that you'll immediately start taking damage just by setting foot inside, meaning, once again, there's only one true path to follow here. I'd like to reiterate again that as restrictive as this all feels when I spell it all out for you, during normal gameplay, it's very subtle and not intrusive. You're always moving forward and seeking out new paths, so you might not even notice the path closing off behind you, especially in a case like this where they drop you into a room without making a big show of it. It's just the game's way of funneling you in the right direction without overwhelming you with the amount of areas that you can explore. For now, that is. The game isn't totally against backtracking. In fact, it's probably one of the better games for that in the series, giving you plenty of opportunities to backtrack for secrets after collecting certain upgrades. But many times when you first enter a new area, or in this opening section, they do a pretty deliberate job of barring access to previous rooms. It's a pretty tricky balance that they somehow achieve really well. Another side note, but there are also some neat water level puzzles here, one of which is even applied under the pressure of an impending Emmy, in which you need to raise this platform by standing on this switch, but by standing still, you put yourself at risk of the Emmy catching up to you. It's clever in how it forces the tension on you like that, but moving along, we'll eventually be led to this door, which we need to use a missile to open. And though that might not seem obvious to anybody who hasn't played the previous Metroid games, this missile door is color-coded as red, the same as your missiles themselves, as well as the missile upgrades and the red blocks that we need to use missiles to destroy, so it isn't unintuitive to try it out. Besides, there isn't any other way to go because the game has blocked off every other path. So we'll eventually find the charge beam, which now allows us to open many of those locked doors that we've been seeing all over the place. And with a critical eye, I almost worried for a moment that this might be an overwhelming moment, because so many paths have just become open to us, so it might be difficult knowing where to start. But Dread turns what could be an overwhelming moment into a satisfying one. First off, the charge beam dramatically bolsters our combat abilities, so there's that. It feels good tearing apart enemies and one-shotting baddies that used to take multiple hits to destroy. But also, because we've been barred from the path behind us, that actually removes a lot of those options. Instead, we are immediately presented with a charge beam door to try our new weapon out on, and the map design cleverly loops us right back to where we started. And as we head down this hallway again, we'll come right up to a charge beam door, which we had already passed by before. If it wasn't obvious from the level design, that's where we're supposed to go. It's so streamlined that you can't help but walk right into this door. And even though this connects us back into those caves that we've been through before, simply by following the path up here, we will end up being looped right back to where we'll find, you guessed it, another charge beam door, which we had previously walked right past. Then we're funneled back into the Emmy zone and pursued like before, and we'll end up back in this hallway with nowhere to go but back up to the same navigation room from before. Last time we were in here, only one door was available to us, but again, now that we have the charge beam, we can open this door, which takes us into this room. Now, look, just as a disclaimer, when I was first brainstorming ideas for this script, I really had no intention of dwelling on this room, because when I played through it, I thought almost nothing of it. I also, just in general, don't like being overly negative in my videos. I have no problem doling out criticism when I feel it's warranted, but I also prefer to do so in a constructive way. I'm not one of those channels that just complains and moans constantly about everything without cause. I prefer instead to be introspective and mindful of my critiques. But at the same time, one of the things that spurred me on to look at this game so critically was this room. I'm sure you all know by now about David Jaffe, who streamed the game, got stuck in this room, and decided that this was enough for him to swear off the game entirely, and make several rant videos about why the game is so poorly designed. And through his criticism, many others have taken a more critical look at this game, myself included, and realized the opposite, that this entire section of the game is funneling you here and onward. This isn't even a significant room, it's really just a hallway leading you up to where you open the thermal doors, but because of how overblown the whole thing has become, I just needed to address it really quickly, in particular Jaffe's own criticisms about the room and the game at large. First off, there's nowhere else to go. Jaffe complained that there are too many rooms to explore, which is a garbage argument in itself, and that it isn't clear that this is the room to be in. However, as I've demonstrated already, the game funnels you here and essentially traps you in this section. All other paths are sealed off or locked. His next criticism is that the destructible ceiling here, which you need to break in order to make progress, blends in too much with the rest of the environment. I might have agreed with that point if the hallway above wasn't fully and completely visible. And besides, the destructible part is visually distinct from the rest of the ceiling, even if it's subtle. But it's also highlighted by this huge window with the light glowing inwards. Next is the enemy placement. They place enemies on the ceiling near the destructible part and above you. There's a good chance you'll accidentally uncover it just through combat. He also says there's no tutorial to indicate that this is what you're supposed to do in the game, but well, there's this text box earlier telling you to try shooting your surroundings if you hit a dead end, and it rolls out this idea and slowly expands on it. The first destructible block you need to break is highlighted, and then the next one just looks like the rest of the environment, and from here they just expand on the concept in different places. Oh, and then he complains that the Switch controller has too many buttons, but by my count it has the same amount of buttons as every other console on the market, so that feels like a really weird argument to make. So what went wrong here? Why did he get stuck here? I believe Jaffe didn't uncover this because he was playing the game the same way he would play Mega Man on the NES, by doing this awkward jump shoot thing, instead of manually aiming. Directional aiming is not new to video games, let alone Metroid. Super Metroid lets you aim in 8 directions, and Samus Returns later expanded on it with full 360-degree aiming, which was carried into Dread. But sure, benefit of the doubt, maybe he hasn't played those previous games. Except that this game tells you how to aim, and it has given you plenty of opportunity to get used to this aiming, including forcing you to aim manually when facing the first enemy. So the reason, in my opinion, that Jaffe here struggled with such a simple obstacle is because he was ignoring the game's tutorials and not using the tools at his disposal. Couple this with his apparent lack of ability to understand the concept known as process of elimination, well, it's a wonder he even made it this far. Willfully ignoring a game's mechanics, tutorials, and tools like this would be like if I played Breath of the Wild and decided to never use the jump button and try auto-jumping off of edges like you could in previous games. It's a surefire way to die frequently by falling off cliffs. When you play a new game like this, you have to understand what tools are available to you and how to use them to make progress. It's not a hard concept.
People talk about this right here. They're like, well, Jaffe, the game tells you. This is what the game tells you earlier on in the game. Hold R to ready missiles and press Y to fire. Okay, fair enough. Some blocks can be destroyed only by using specific weapons. Now, when they tell you this is what they show you. This is a block. Some destructible blocks are hidden.
Right.
Well, these have suddenly started looking like everything else, right?
Right.
If you run into a dead end, try shooting at your surroundings.
Right.
This is a cover your ass line that...
The game is giving you the tools to succeed, bro. You can aim, you can figure out that there's a block somewhere that you could shoot. Do you want the big arrow to point it at you?
There's no indication on the map, there's no indication visually.
Now look, I don't like being so negative, and if it were any random idiot, I'd just write them off as such. But the fact here with Jaffe is that he's worked in game design. He's an industry professional. He should understand design philosophies in video games. I'm not gonna say that I'm a professional here. I don't work in game design, but I like to think that I know what I'm talking about here and that I'm pretty aware of this sort of thing. The worst part of it all isn't even the room itself. It's the dude's inability to admit when he's wrong, which is a trait that strikes me as simply immature. Those of you who watch my live streams know that I'm not exactly a competitive next level gamer pro dude or whatever, but I am persistent, and I am always fully ready to admit when I'm just sucking at a game and failing because I messed up. The argument that there should be no room at all for failure in a game is, in my opinion, nonsense. Failure is part of life. Failure is and has always been one of the best ways to learn and to improve. Now, this isn't the case for all games. For example, I love Animal Crossing, which is a pretty laid-back game, but I also love Metroid, which is a series known for being very challenging. And I think that as long as you understand the difference between these types of games going in, then there's no reason a game like Metroid can't make you stop, use your brain, and think about things once in a while. With that said, this isn't even one of the game's hard parts. Seriously, there are far more challenging things ahead. So that's enough about the Jaffe Room. Let's just go ahead and move on. Once you make it through here, we'll pass through this long tube hallway and drop down this shaft, which as usual presents us with some branching paths that aren't really accessible. This time, it's extreme heat discouraging us from exploring those rooms. There's a save room and then this terminal where we activate the thermal fuel flow, which opens these thermal doors. From here, it's all environmental clues. We've seen these closed thermal doors already, but as they open, we can see the lava flow down these pipes open them up. so it's simply a matter of following along the pipes, including through the Emmy Zone, so that we can explore the rooms that are now open to us. Then we're forced down this shaft, and we'll make it to the central unit, which we can destroy by simply aiming and shooting at it. Another concept Jaffe struggled with, which gives us the temporary Omega Cannon so that we can destroy the Emmy. A detail that I really like is that the door we need to open in here using the Omega Cannon is modeled to be visually similar to the Emmy's face, so it's not hard to put 2 and 2 together. With the Emmy defeated, we'll be rewarded with a new ability, the Spider Magnet, which allows us to stick to and climb these magnetic walls. There's a bunch of these to try out, including this platform which, when we hang on, lowers down, and then this panel which does the same thing. There's big glowing arrows on these to really drive this idea home. Then we're led down this hallway through this gap which does the same thing as before, preventing backtracking, and we'll arrive in this room where we'll fight Corpius. He's a big ugly monster, and it's simply a matter of dodging his attacks and pummeling his face and glowing weak spot when he's invisible with missiles. Then he's dead, and we get the Phantom Cloak ability, which allows us to pass through those hallways where the door shuts on us, because we no longer trip the motion sensors while invisible. Thus, just like when we got the charge beam, many more paths, including those we've previously been trailed past, are now open to us. And that's just the opening act of Dread. However, the rest of the game follows these design principles. It presents the illusion of branching paths, it often closes off the path behind us until we find an essential upgrade or ability to overcome that obstacle, and makes us pay attention to the environment since the way forward is not always obvious. Not always. But sometimes it actually is quite obvious. It presents us with set pieces that lead us into certain areas, whether that be an Emmy pursuing us or changes in the environment itself. These principles are not new to the series. Previous games have done similar things. Super Metroid also traps you in certain areas and forces you to master its skills and mechanics, as well as obtain certain upgrades. But Dread streamlines this and rightfully trusts the player's intuition and intelligence, and often this streamlined navigation is so subtle that you may not even notice it at all, which is a sure sign that is done right. There's another point I'd like to touch on real quick about Dread's design. The game isn't necessarily an easy game, but it manages to get people wanting to continue playing it through a concept I'm naming satisfaction through suffering. In short, what this means is that while the game can be extremely punishing, it also rewards you for getting through its challenges. It offers payoffs for being persistent and skilled in ways that are simply satisfying. For example, the Emmy robots. These enemies are at first indestructible, meaning that when you encounter one, you simply have to run in order to survive. Evading the Emmys can be challenging. They pursue you relentlessly, and each has their own abilities that make them proficient at these pursuits. It's very likely that you're going to see this game over screen a lot, because when an Emmy catches you, it can insta-kill you. However, the game rewards skill by giving you a very narrow window of timing to counter the Emmy and allowing a quick escape if one catches you, and it rewards your persistence by giving a light at the end of the tunnel in the form of a huge laser that you use to blow their heads off. There is a real palpable sense of satisfaction when taking these guys down simply because of how brutal they are. The stronger the enemy, the harder they fall. Bosses and enemies are the same. It feels great to pull off a counter already on common enemies, but with bosses in particular, the counters string you into a sequence where Samus can grapple with them, do awesome acrobatics, and pummel them with missiles, which always feels so great to do. You can still kill the bosses normally without any counters, but it always feels so great to pull these off. because again, the timing is limited, meaning you need to develop your skills in order to achieve this, but the game will pay you back for such. This isn't limited to combat either. The game's many upgrades and abilities do the same thing with traversal. For example, the lead up to the gravity suit takes you through this cumbersome underwater section. Samus, wearing a huge metal power suit, is naturally weighed down underwater, so her usual nimbleness is basically negated. The game strings you through this lengthy section under these conditions, making you navigate this flooded labyrinth at a disadvantage until you find the gravity suit. And suddenly, you can move freely through the water without restriction. Again, previous games have done this, but Dread does it particularly well, so your persistence is rewarded. By the same token, your skill can be rewarded as well, as the game offers a tricky Shine Spark puzzle that skips a great deal of the underwater section and provides a nice shortcut to getting the gravity suit. The trade-off here is that this is a difficult one to pull off, so you have to be really good at using Shine Sparks. If you're not, this shortcut will be more frustrating to get through than the lengthy underwater section. But in either case, no matter which of these routes you take, getting through them is immensely satisfying because of the reward you get for it. It is always so satisfying to me when a game puts a difficult obstacle or enemy in your path and then offers a payoff to you in the form of the means to overcome those obstacles more easily. So in the end, what can we say about Dread's design? For starters, Mercury Steam clearly knows what they're doing, and they clearly are passionate about Metroid. They took what worked in previous games and refined those ideas while also making them extremely subtle. It's one of the most well-designed games on the market right now, and I don't say that lightly. It somehow makes you feel like you're getting lost in a huge, expansive open world, while also not letting you get actually lost and trailing you down a linear path. It's cleverly designed to give you this isolated feel while also having an invisible hand guide you. It's my favorite game of 2021, and it's coming dangerously close to competing with Super Metroid as my favorite game in the series. And that is saying a lot. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon, as well as my channel members, particularly those who supported at the cheese level or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, Greymage, Hylian Historian, Gale, and Ethan3G. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.